Welcome to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brianna Griffith, and here's what's going down in your backyard and across the world. This week we are talking about the Rodney Reed case. For those who may not be familiar, Rodney Reed is a man who by many accounts was wrongfully convicted for the murder of Stacey Stites in 1996, when it appears that the likely murderer, again by many accounts, was her fiance, Jimmy Fennell. There's a lot that was not provided in evidence at the time of the trial. A lot more has come out and been revealed since then. So to talk about all of this with the Rodney Reed case, we are joined by Roderick Reed, who is the brother of Rodney Reed, as well as the vice president and CEO of the Reed Justice Initiative. Thank you very much, Roderick, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This case has been going on, as you say, for like 23 years. My brother is wrongfully convicted. He is innocent of this crime. To give you a summary of it, my brother was having a secret affair with Stacey Stites. Jimmy Fennell was her fiance. Jimmy Fennell found out about the affair and threatened my brother. Now, Stacey Stites is a white female. My brother is a black man. And if you don't know, but anyway, he threatened the life of my brother. And long story short, he ended up murdering Stacey. And they set my brother up for the crime. Right out of the gate, there was no DNA testing done on the murder weapon itself. And it has not been tested unto this day. And we're trying to get that tested. None of his witnesses were called. None of the places that Stacey was last known to be alive, her apartment, it was never tested. There's a whole lot of things going on in this case, that went on in this case, should I say, that have still not come to light. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much. To me, one of the stunning things when I was researching this was just how much there is that was how much evidence there is, both exonerating Rodney Reed as well as kind of showing the guilt of Jimmy Fennell, that has never been revealed, essentially, that was not revealed to the jury. But then as the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has kind of heard this additional evidence, they continue to refuse to even hear it, to even consider it into submission in ways that are by themselves an absolute injustice in so many ways. So there's a really good series that's coming out on this called A Plea for Justice, why Texas will be executing an innocent man, that just released part 3. I'd like to kind of get into the details of some of this just so people, I think, have some background. So even the time of death that was reported at the Reed trial was entirely wrong and entirely based essentially on the testimony of Jimmy Fennell himself. He had told police that Stacey Stites had left around 3 a.m. to go to work. And so the person who was investigating that case, or the person who did the medical records, Roberto Bayardo, testified that said she died around 3 a.m. This was not based on the actual medical science. This was simply, he was taking essentially Fennell's word and saying, well, she must have, if she left around 3 a.m., it must have been after 3 a.m. A review by Dr. Baden in this, who's a kind of world, or at least nationally renowned medical examiner, concluded that she had actually died before midnight on the 22nd, so a day earlier. The body had obviously been moved 3 to 4 hours after the murder. And she had been face down 4 to 5 hours before being moved to a face up position, as can be kind of witnessed in the video of the crime scene. The real damning part of that, I think, is the type and amount of bodily fluids that were found on the floor of a pickup truck that Stacey and Jimmy shared, that was abandoned in a high school parking lot. That had been where essentially the medical evidence shows that she had been kept in the truck for 3 to 4 hours after she had been killed, which would absolutely, as well as many other things I'd like to get into as we have time, would implicate Jimmy Fennell in this murder. So Jimmy Fennell testified that he and Stacey were alone from 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. If she was killed around midnight, then only Fennell would have likely been around for much of that. So that's just one of many, I think, of the kind of many inconsistencies that would really point to kind of different murder suspect here. And Fennell himself took polygraph tests. Again, polygraph tests can be kind of misleading for sure, but the fact that he failed several polygraph tests in a row when he was asked the question whether he had anything to do with Stacey Stites' murder, and when he went to take the third polygraph test, simply asked for a lawyer. He pleaded the fifth and asked for a lawyer. I think among the many other things is really just damning evidence to show that there is a much better case against Fennell, especially given the later accusations made against him and the fact that he actually served 10 years for a later rape that he committed on duty. I don't know. It's just there's so much here that's just absolutely damning against Fennell, and the fact that like the Court of Criminal Appeals even refuses to hear any of this speaks just absolute volumes about the injustice going on here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you were talking about the time of death and everything, and that's very crucial in this case. Very, very crucial, because as you stated, he said she left at 3. And Michael Bodden and also 2 other independent medical examiners, Riddick and Stitt, they all 3 have did independent, their independent studies of the evidence, and they all come up with the same conclusion, that she had been dead long before 12 o'clock. And then not only that, the DNA that was found at the crime scene on the beer cans that implicated and had David Hall, who was Jimmy Fennell's best friend and lived in the same apartment complex as him, his DNA was on the can. Ed Tamela, who was the investigator, the initial investigator on this case, his DNA was on the can. And Stacey Stites' DNA were on these cans. This was at the crime scene. Now, this DNA testing was done by the DPS crime lab here in Texas, and the defense asked for this, but it was released to the prosecutors, and the prosecutors withheld this evidence until after the trial, and that's a Brady violation in itself. That was never brought up to the jury. They never heard that. There are so many things in this case that just blows people away, blows my mind still to this day. There are also witnesses that could prove the relationship between Stacey Stites and my brother that were never called. My family members, my mom, my dad, myself, other brothers, cousins, friends, people that work with Stacey Stites at HEB that's not affiliated to any of us or the family had just had not been called. They had written statements, and they were never called. And it is just mind-blowing that we've been going through this for all these years, and this evidence has been out there. And yet my brother still sits on death row. And yet Stacey Stites has had no justice in this case, because her true killer is Jimmy Fennell, and all the evidence points to him. And we've been trying to get this evidence into the courts, and as you said, they have repeatedly denied us over and over again. And there's been no due process. My brother didn't have a jury of his peers. It was an all-white jury. It is just, to me, just a total mistrial. You know what I mean? They should have granted my brother a new trial years ago. And as you said, Robert Bardo, the original medical examiner that did this, in the beginning he said there was signs of rape and that the body had been dead. She had been dead after 3 o'clock based on no medical findings. This was his opinion and everything else. But later, back in 2012, he comes back and he says, he recants his whole statement. He says his statement was misconstrued by the state, and that there are no signs of rape. And the other medical examiners came with the findings saying that there was no rape. The DNA that was found that linked my brother to the crime, the 3 sperm heads with detached tails, that was old DNA. And they said based on all their findings, there's no way medically and scientifically possible that Rodney Reed could have committed this crime based on everything they found that includes Jimmy Fennell's testimony. So we're sitting here today with all this evidence, and they're yet to grant my brother a new trial or test the DNA. And this is something that we cannot have going on in our society. This is something that we cannot have because it is total injustice. And an injustice to one is an injustice to us all. So, and we're pleading for the state to do this medical testing.
I'd like to make an additional point about Bayardo, the person who did the medical exam here. He seems pretty clearly to have been incentivized to change or alter a lot of his analysis. He was doing essentially he was bringing in a very, very large income, and we've covered things like this with regard to some of the people who take like public defenses, where they just take on in Austin, for instance, they'll take on way too many cases than they can actually reasonably handle, just kind of plea everybody out, not really try to get anyone the best deal, and make a whole lot of money that way. And a similar thing appears to be happening with this medical examiner, where he was doing anywhere from 395 to 823 autopsies per year, where he made up to about $2.6 million performing out of county autopsies for counties like Bastrop. Given this many autopsies that he was doing out of county, first of all, it suggests that he can't possibly have kind of the level of detail that we really kind of need for this sort of evidence. For like a murder case, you really can't be working on kind of several autopsies per day. 823 autopsies in a year equals like almost 2 to 3 per day. You can't be doing that and doing a good job anyway. But then the fact that he was being paid by essentially these so-called justice systems, the prosecutors who were kind of paying him these extra fees, he would have that sort of monetary incentive to kind of rule in their favor. So when you see a corrupt, what appears to be a clearly corrupt system like the police system here, where, as mentioned, like DNA from several other of Fennell's fellow police officers was found on beer cans near the body. And where, again, kind of with Fennell's, the rape case he was actually convicted on, getting into that a little bit, the fact that like Fennell had several kind of officers drive him essentially to rearrest the victim, to re-detain the victim after she had been released, after she had been raped and released and brought back. Fennell had several other officers joined him in going back to the victim and essentially engaging in this intimidation tactic against the victim. Like, it really reveals that the entire kind of system here is absolutely corrupt. It's not just a matter of Jimmy Fennell. Like, there's a systemic issue. There's a systemic systemic injustice at the very kind of heart of all of this.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I'm glad you brought that up because the sheriff at the time, Richard Hernandez, went to jail himself. And see, let me back up just a little bit. Upon election of being sheriff, one of his campaign slogans is whatever. If you elect me, I will find the murder of Stacey Stites. I'll give. He gave the county that promise, and then they go on and elect him, and then come to find out he is corrupt as well. He was arrested and charged with 7 different felonies. The sheriff, the chief of police, David Boyd, was arrested himself. There's all kind of corruption in Bastrop County. Still to this day, they are very corrupt. They are not, they treat people, they're racist. Let me just put it like it is. It is a very racist, racism stems at the root of all this, okay? My brother is on death row simply because he was sleeping with a white woman, okay? That's the reason he's on death row. That's the reason he's there right now, and it makes no sense. All the evidence points toward the officers and officers that in this case. And Ed Tamela, the lead investigator, died 6 months later from a suspicious gunshot wound to the head, and they claim it was suicide. We don't believe so. His family believes that he was killed because of the Stacey Stites investigation, and believe he was going to come forth with information that he had that would implicate Jimmy Fennell and other police officers. There's also another officer that was out of Giddings, I believe, that was murdered. He was doing his own independent investigation. Jerry Joe Bryan, he was murdered, and all of his records in his briefcase were missing from the Stacey Stites case when they found his body. Okay, there was nothing, and his wife testifies to the point that he had all kind of this, information on that case. All that was missing. So there are 2 dead police officers in this case as well. A lot of people don't know that, So this case is filled with corruption, racism, and it's been a nightmare that my family has been living with for the last 23 years. Rodney has suffered and is still suffering and still being tortured down there on death row. And when I say torture, that means locked down 23 hours a day, 7 days a week, with only 1 hour out, okay? He has no physical contact with nobody. And that in itself is a form of torture for something that you didn't do almost 23 years now, and my family has been suffering for that long because that's a part of us. They have a part of us locked on death row right now, and we're suffering as well, right aside along with him. And we need to have justice in this case, and we need to stop this November 20th date from happening, because all forensic evidence, all evidence points to Jimmy Fennell, and all evidence proves Rodney Reed is not guilty. They had no other evidence that tied him or linked him to this murder. There were no fingerprints of Rodney. There were no hair follicles of Rodney. There were no eyewitnesses that put Rodney at the crime scene. Nothing. But there's evidence that puts everybody else at the crime scene. There's eyewitnesses that put them at the crime scene. There's forensic evidence that puts them at the crime scene. But yet my brother is still on death row. And it makes no sense.
Yeah, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOOP 91.7 FM Austin. We are also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans, and we are available as a podcast wherever podcasts are podded. We are speaking with Roderick Reed, the brother of Rodney Reed, as well as the VP and CEO of the Reed Justice Initiative. About the Rodney Reed case and the many injustices surrounding that. Of course, when we're talking about the actual conditions that, I mean, generally anyone within our prison system is, but often those on death row receive kind of the absolute worst of this. I mean, that is also in many ways, as you said, it is a form of torture. You cannot keep people confined in solitary confinement for that long. It is, legally speaking, a form of torture, and yet it is just sort of treated as kind of the norm within our current system. And this kind of rush, as you mentioned, I'd like to go back a little bit to kind of the racism part of this, because I mean, for sure, we're talking about like, we're talking about small Texas towns here, for sure. I mean, not that I think there's any small American town or any large American city that doesn't have this kind of racism problem. But it still is nonetheless like very systemic within kind of the Bastrop County. The fact that Jimmy Fennell, his next girlfriend, who he was dating 3 months after Stacey's death, basically claimed that he had basically called all black people the N-word, that among other things, he also stalked and harassed her and screamed obscenities at her months after they broke up. He would like pull over and harass future boyfriends. But the fact that he kind of openly used the N-word, that he also bragged about, or not bragged per se, but like he was basically saying during a kind of training when he was doing police training, that if he ever found his girlfriend cheating on him, he said that he would strangle her with a belt. Because it wouldn't leave any fingerprints. So that was something that he clearly felt comfortable enough saying during police training. Again, so much of this has not ever been entered into evidence during the Rodney Reed trial or even afterward. Again, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has continually denied Rodney Reed the right to either a new trial or the right to basically have any of this heard. And, on like, I guess one last comment on that racism part is especially that, again, we're talking about a black man who is convicted by an all white jury in a Texas town. There's so much kind of racism baked into that history for anyone who knows kind of the history of Jim Crow, even slightly. All of the evidence we've talked about during this and all of the, all of the kind of history of the Texas injustice system really speaks for itself here, that Rodney Reed deserves his freedom. Absolutely. If you can maybe talk a little bit first, kind of about kind of his conditions, his kind of personal health, or anything else I guess you feel is relevant, just generally how he's doing, and then what people can kind of do if they're interested in this case, if they're interested in kind of working toward justice for Rodney Reed. I guess where can people go for more information?
Well, to start out, to answer your questions, right now, Rodney is currently on death watch, okay? And he is doing okay, I guess, as well as can be expected, or probably even better than can be expected, considering he's been down there for 23 years because of his faith in God and his faith in, justice, you know what I mean? Because he does feel that he will be, freed from this if we do what we are called to do, and that's stand up and get him a new trial. Right now, what people can do, they can write the governor, okay? They can call the governor's office. They can contact the Board of Pardons and Paroles. They can contact Brian Gertz, the district attorney of Bastrop County. They can call that office as well, write that office. they can get contact us at Facebook//Reed Justice Initiative. They can get with us. We have an event page that they can attend rallies. We'll be going to the Capitol, the governor's mansion. We'll be protesting outside the governor's mansion all week this week. And on the last day, we will go to the Capitol, and there we'll have speakers on that last day. We have some Texas State Representatives, Vicki Goodwin, who will be speaking about the injustice in this case, and other exoneratees and people that are going through the same thing, people that have family members that are on death row, that's represented by the Innocence Project, whom Rodney is represented by. Rodney is represented by the Innocence Project out of New York, in case people didn't know that. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and there's ways that they can help. Right now, Reed Justice Initiative and my family is asking for donations because we're traveling across this country. When we finish this all-week protest here, we will be flying out, going to L.A. We will be doing a show in L.A. on the Dr. Phil show. We will be there. And the Dr. Phil is giving us 2 days on that. After we do the Dr. Phil show, we'll be flying to Washington, D.C. We will be protesting out there and trying to get the Supreme Court to hear our plea of injustice that is going on in Rodney's case. And then from there, we'll be going to Ohio, where we'll meet with Sister Helen Prejean and speaking about abolishing the death penalty and stuff, and also directly talking about Rodney's case there. And then from there, we'll be going to New York, where we'll be sitting down, we'll be having showing of this documentary that you were speaking about. And we will also have a panel discussion, and we're supposed to be meeting with Reverend Al Sharpton in New York. And then we come back here to Texas on the 19th, and we will be attending the 20th annual Abolish the Death Penalty March here in Texas. So there's a lot of things that people can do, and they can get with us at Facebook/Reed Justice Initiative and get involved. And we need all support we can get. We need monetary support so we can finish getting my brother's story out, so we can travel around and do everything that we can to stop the murder of my brother. Crimes have been committed against my brother, and we need to stand up as a community, as a country, as a nation to stop this injustice that's going on.
We're going to go ahead and wrap up there. We have been joined by Roderick Reed, who's the Vice President and CEO of the Reed Justice Initiative, talking about the Rodney Reed case. Thank you very much, Roderick, for coming on the show today, and good luck moving forward with this for sure.
Well, thank you for having us, and we will be most likely coming back on the show and giving updates, because we're going to be traveling around the nation, and we'll be more than happy to call back in. But thank you for having us.
You are listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOOP 91.7 FM Austin and is also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are also available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. Stay tuned. We are going to talk about the AISD Police Department's confiscation of the phone of the president of Education Austin. That's the teachers union here in Austin. The phone was seized basically after an incident that happened in AISD school board meeting. But to me, this appears to be an absolute gross violation of the Fourth Amendment regarding unreasonable search and seizure. It seems to be a gross violation generally of civil rights and rights to privacy. So to talk about all this, the incident that set it off, and the implications regarding privacy and technology, we are joined for this episode by Ken Zarifis, who is the president of Education Austin. Thank you, Ken, for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, very glad to have you on. So let's get into this. If you can kind of tell people generally what the story is behind the seizure of your phone that happened.
Right. Well, I mean, it's a long story, but I will try to make it short. We were at a board meeting about a month ago where there was a group of people who had organized outside of Austin, I think a good number from Temple, who were in opposition to the new sex ed curriculum, which is a progressive curriculum, talks about the realities of sex ed, and talks about LGBTQ lives and that reality. They were there to dismiss it, to insult it, and to attack it. And attack it they did, along with the people that were there in support of the sex ed curriculum. One of the individuals that was there to support it was Naomi Wilson, a black trans woman, who was sitting in the audience listening to one person from this group go up after another, insulting being LGBTQ. It was just an attack, one after another. And at one point, two elderly white women leaned up to Naomi in the audience from behind her and said, "You're disgusting." A human being actually has to hear this. Well, Naomi instantly pointed to the women and announced throughout the boardroom, "I'm being assaulted, I'm being insulted, I'm being attacked by these women behind me." You would think at that moment is when the APD, if the police are going to do anything, would want to find out. They did nothing. They stood there. They just watched it happen. One of my members, Heather, went to assist Naomi and to see how she was doing and to give her support. I then stepped to the back of the auditorium, concerned that something might happen. Shortly thereafter, the two old women got up and moved away, and Naomi was just at her limit. And she stood up and began to state the 19 names of trans people that have been murdered so far this year, speaking to the fact that she was treated horribly in AISD school for years. And it was then and only then did the police decide to take any action, and anybody seemed to have any care for Naomi. She was escorted out, or she was guided out, and she then began to walk through the courtyard. The police followed her, and they were told to stand down. Later that week, I was contacted by the police. They said that they saw that I was filming on the district video, and I told them that I had a 20, 30-second video, but that I didn't think that it would be of any help to them. I went into the office, sat down and talked with not one, but 4 police officers to get a 20-second video out of my phone. They asked me to download it. They asked me to email it or to text it to them. I asked them, why do they need it? What is the purpose for it? And they insisted that they had to have it to make a judgment of whether she had disrupted the meeting or not. Well, their videos would have indicated that, so I knew there was something else going on. They were never forthcoming, transparent, or honest about it. I refused to give them the video because from what they had told me, there was no need for my video. They then said that they would be pursuing they could seize it, pursue a search warrant, and would confiscate and would take the video out that way.
So in their mind, and there's so much I want to kind of follow up on here, but in their mind, or at least the story they present to you, was that they could seize it without the search warrant present, and that they could then later obtain a search warrant.
That is correct.
So they could essentially, just based on this assumption that you had a 20-second video in your phone, based on this knowledge, they could seize your entire phone, keep your entire, I think of how much any given person uses their phone per any given day.
Absolutely.
That just doesn't seem, even from a legal perspective, that just doesn't seem the whole water.
It's troubling at the very least. They can cite, they can confiscate, get their search warrant. We weren't just going to give it to them because we didn't see it as important enough for their cause, or at least what they were telling. But they should be able to explain it to me. They should tell me what's going on and what they're looking for and why they're looking for it. That they didn't do. So they went out later that day. They got their search warrant, came to my office at 5:00 in the evening with my son there in my office. Oh, and I forgot to mention, during the first conversation around noon, it was interesting as things were winding down. They said, "Ken, You're just complicating things. It really isn't that hard. We're going to get it anyway. You should just give it to us now. And that's interesting, that my rights, the Bill of Rights, the rights that this country was founded upon, are an inconvenience to the AISD Police Department. It's a sad day when rights of people are an inconvenience to our law enforcement.
Yeah, and when it's complicating things.
It's just complicating.
The Fourth Amendment is just complicating things.
I mean, my day's complicated going into the office, sitting in front of 4 police officers and being told they're going to take my phone and insisting on keeping it. This is the problem. This is why we've called a roundtable to come together to determine with the NAACP, Austin Justice Coalition. Hopefully, we have trans groups, we have LGBTQ groups. We want to make sure people that have a voice in the social justice movement in this city have a voice on what, if any, the role of Austin police should be in AISD.
Yeah, and that raises kind of some questions about what good, the increased police presence in schools has been. I mean, so much of this started kind of in the late 90s as a response to Columbine with ostensibly to prevent school shootings. Yet we've seen when the police have had a chance to prevent a school shooting, usually they wind up kind of running away and not actually doing anything about it. But then on the other hand, I've seen what, having worked in a lot of different schools in AISD in various capacities, having taught at both some of the richest and some of the poorest schools in AISD, I've seen what it is that police presence, I think, does generally in AISD, and it's not a productive one. The fact that I one time walked into, I was teaching a podcasting, this is a little tangential, but I was teaching a podcasting class at a, really kind of poor, primarily Black and Latinx school. And one of the kids had either not returned one of the recorders. It was just this little portable recorder. Probably cost about $100 new. It probably wasn't worth like $25 or $50. And so one of the kids had either not returned it or had lost it in their backpack. I don't know what the case is. But I was called up to the school to get it. And the school asked me whether I want to press charges against the kid, against a middle school kid. Mm-hmm. And like, to me, that represents a kind of militarization of schools caused by this like police presence where everything is now, like everything that kids normally do in the course of being kids is now treated as sort of a crime. And especially Black and brown kids are treated as essentially as adults with like kind of, where the full brunt of the law comes down on them in so many awful ways.
Well, I think that we've seen this reality and kind of what it is a bit tangential, but it really does speak to this issue. What is the role of law enforcement in our schools? Now, I'm not saying one way or another what it should or shouldn't be, but what I think that we've got to look at is what we are in a racist system. Our country was founded on a racial economic system, a racist economic system that provided wealth for whites and enslaved Blacks. And today, 150 years after that stopped, today, we're still dealing with the ramifications of that. And we see it in our schools. We see it in our institutions. It's not as blatant necessarily as slavery was, but it's clearly evident in our schools and in our systems when over and over and over again, we see disproportionate numbers of Black and brown kids being victims of the rules that are dictated by schools. And so why is that? Well, it's a system that's set up to be against people of color. And I think that people, even unknowingly, are allowed to be co-opted into that system and then make laws and policies that perpetuate the system. We need to have a stop. We need to be able to stop and step back and look at the system that we've created. And how can we make it a better system? If this district is about equity, then we have to find equity in law enforcement. And do we have a model department, or do we have a department that people will be scared of because they're not sure if their phone's going to be taken up under false pretenses or ignored pretenses or illusionary pretenses or whatever the case may be? People need to feel safe. And we're concerned that people won't feel safe. And we've got to change that.
Yeah. I'd also kind of like to raise another point, which is when you look at kind of, I like to kind of get into the history a lot of times. And if you look at the history of police, a lot of police departments in the U.S. either started as kind of runaway slave patrols, or the other kind of route of policing is these private kind of union busting security agencies like Pinkerton, for instance.
Yes.
And I think the kind of aggressiveness with which the police have shown to you during this, and the fact that they seized your phone, especially given the sheer amount of information that's stored on a union organizer's phone, I think has some really serious implications there as to not just kind of the police state, but the surveillance aspect of that. What information could they have seized from that? I think raises some very, very serious implications about like what is it I think that AISD Police Department is kind of doing with that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm really troubled by the fact that I have 3,000 members that I am responsible for. I communicate on my phone with them. I have a family. I have 3 children. Everything is on our phones today. It's not just me. It's everything. And the fear that surrounds that item being picked up, being even looked at, not copied, but just looked at, is troubling for us. And so we have to figure out what technology's role is in our schools. We have to figure out what technology's role is in our lives. And that's related to law enforcement when they can intrude on that. We should be building out what technology is for us and incorporating more technology into our world, not trying to limit it, which we're seeing this is a fear and a limitation of that technology. I've been elected to be responsible for a lot of people, and the absolute disregard for that. Because if I go back to that meeting when they came to me at 5 o'clock in my office where my son was, as I was arguing with them why they didn't need to take my phone and why did you change from this morning? It's different now. Now you're saying not just the video. They wanted the entire phone, and it brought their magic box in to suck everything out of my phone. It was different. They couldn't answer me. 3 guys are standing there. They couldn't give me an answer. No, not couldn't. They wouldn't.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They refused to tell me why they wanted. Well, they said, they finally began to share, well, we saw people moving around Naomi just before she stood up, and so we feel like this could have been pre-planned. Exactly. You know what was pre-planned? The people that came there to infiltrate, that came there to create a problem, that talked to Naomi and said that she was disgusting. Those are the people that should have been investigated. Those are the people that had a meeting outside of town 2 weeks earlier for an hour and a half to plan this disruption. If anybody needed to be investigated, it was them, not Naomi, not me.
Yeah, and it also gets to what gets considered to be a disruption. The fact that people at this school board meeting, the fact that like these kind of groups, these incredibly bigoted groups who essentially do not want to see any sort of like modern sex education, these bigoted groups that want LGBTQ people to go back in the closet or just not to exist. Right. They can get up there and they can spew absolutely hateful messages, but as long as they do it in sort of a calm voice, as long as they don't, as long as they do it when it's their turn at the mic, or as long as they just kind of whisper these hateful things toward LGBTQ people, somehow that's not disruption. But when an LGBTQ person pushed to the limit, then stands up for herself, that somehow like that's disruptive behavior, I think speaks to the double standards.
Well, so whose system is the former system? I mean, whose is it that says you have to stand up and just be prim and proper? You can't shout out. You can't say it. Whose system's that? Yeah. It's white folks, right? That's how we're supposed to conduct themselves and our anal retentive selves and what we grew up around. And so we're saying, watch the decorum. Be respectful. Well, whose respect? Whose decorum? And do we have to stick with that? No, when someone's being attacked verbally. No, we should be able to stand up. In that system, a black woman in distress stands up and says, I'm being attacked. And who gets questioned? The woman standing up saying, I'm being attacked. It's just unfathomable that she wouldn't have people come to her defense. You're exactly right.
Yeah. So if you're just tuning in, you're listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. We are talking with Ken Zarifis, who's the president of Education Austin about first of all, the kind of incident regarding the AISD school board meeting, and then the seizure of his phone by AISD police after the fact, the seizure of the entire phone, which, again, at the time of the seizure of the phone, they were essentially saying that they could seize the phone without a warrant, was kind of the initial claim. So I'd like to now kind of talk a little bit about, I guess, first of all, Texas SB 944 and some of the conversations that have been had around that. And then if we can, a little bit later get into sort of the kind of steps that Education Austin has taken to kind of respond to this.
Sure. Well, I think that a lot of this, I have to say, Brianna, I have to couch is that as a straight white male running the largest union in the city of Austin with a lot of legal support around me, I enjoy a tremendous amount of privilege. I don't have to necessarily worry too much about what happens because I've got protection. This gives us really pause when we saw in the same environment a black trans woman that was essentially ignored. We have teachers at the beginning of the year that are in fear because of a new bill that was passed, SB 944, that for all its good intentions, has been rolled out by the district in a horrid way that insisted that if people don't comply, they will be committing a felony. So this is a bill that makes it that teachers need to deposit, bank any texts that they make with either students or parents. And they are subject to open records requests, and we believe potentially they could have their phones picked up in the same way that I had mine picked up. Although I want to be very clear that mine was not picked up under the guise of SB 944. That's for district employees. I am not a district employee anymore. I'm an employee of Education Austin. But we see this as that if the district is going to misuse my rights, if the district is going to misuse their ability to get my phone, I have no doubt that they may very well misuse SB 944 and that right to get into someone's phone. It's not a big leap. And while while Senator Watson's office reached out to us concerned about 944, it's not about our representation of 944. We're concerned with how the district is talking to its employees about SB 944 and that they're scaring people. The reality is that employees in this district are scared to death that their phone's going to get picked up. And in the middle of all this, my phone, in fact, gets picked up. It gets copied completely, everything on my phone. The text messages, which they said they're going to have to read my text messages to see if I was communicating with people. Everything gets picked up out of my phone. I think our members and the employees of the district have a right to be concerned about how this police department will conduct itself on any phone, let alone SB 944 or a situation like I found myself in, or what would a student do? What does a student out of my school, I taught at Burnett Middle School, what does an 8th grade student do when they're in a police officer's office and the police officer leans in and that student does not know their rights? What do they do? How do they act? What do they give up? Do they know that they should have their parents there? Do they know that they don't, that certain things are off limits for search and seizure? Do they know any of it? My guess is no. They should, though. We should be teaching them what their rights are.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely reasonable response. I think, thinking back to that scenario earlier, if I was an absolutely awful person, if I was just like the worst scum of the earth and I decided to press charges against that kid over like a $25, $50 recorder that he lost in his backpack, would he know his rights for something like that? And the kind of the sheer number of things that we've seen kids actually charged with in schools, the sheer number of times where we've seen kids, and it's almost always black and brown kids who are charged with the absolute most kind of heinous offenses over the smallest things. Like seeing, for instance, kindergartners throwing a temper tantrum and being charged with assault. I think it was an actual thing or similar to a thing that happened where a kindergartner was actually arrested for having thrown a temper tantrum in the middle of class and taken out in handcuffs, I believe. So it's like, yeah, the police overreach is truly kind of horrifying here. The just generally with regard to like charging children with crimes in the course of a school day, but then the other part of that of the kind of chilling effect that this has, and the kind of threats that are made against teachers, students, and other kind of school employees about how their phones can be seized. I don't know. It speaks to a very dystopian culture, I think, to me.
Well, to kind of illustrate this a little bit, it was a couple of years ago that we were working with Texas Appleseed and many other social justice groups throughout the city in working to find a way to ban suspensions of students from pre-K to second grade. Now, you wouldn't think that you'd have to suspend a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
I have a 5-year-old that's a kindergartner right now. And you wouldn't think that you would have to do that. But what we found out is that behaviors that are just normal for a 3 or 4-year-old, 5-year-old, they might strike out. They might swing at a person. That's not about a poor behavior that was taught. It's the only way that a child sometimes can express themselves. If they run, if they throw a tantrum, there are things that we need to adjust to. But we instead punish them in a way that is opening the door. I mean, it's that first referral that starts a kid down that school to prison pipeline, because those referrals are wildly disproportionate to Black and brown kids, and predominantly are young Black males. And it's troubling that that's how we default constantly to that population. So it shows that we've got to stop this because we're feeding that pipeline. I think that I've taught for 12 years at Burnett Middle School. I've been 10 years doing this work as a union. I know people in the police department that are good people. I know some really good SROs. And those that might be listening out there know who they are. But I also, when I talk about these things, I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about an institution, a system that is flawed and has some people in it that are flawed that perpetuate the racist institution that it is. So we've got to take a step back. We've got to start working on what is the role? How can we improve this? How do we improve policies? How do we make these outcomes better for our kids?
Yeah, and one of the things that I have really appreciated about Education Austin that I've seen is that willingness to stand up for LGBTQ people, to actually kind of be there at the school board meetings alongside LGBTQ activists like Naomi Wilson, because I really think, I mean, that is kind of the power to me of unions in many ways, is that ability to connect people, all kind of working and oppressed people. So there's like, you show up for me, I show up to you, you help me, I help you. Mm-hmm. We're in this struggle together. I think that's a very powerful thing and a very powerful service that unions provide, not just about, I mean, of course, obviously about the actual labor aspect of that. Fighting for fair wages, fighting for fair working conditions is absolutely crucial. And that itself is also kind of an intersectional issue. And then, of course, that ability, like that strength really lies in that, I guess what we would call intersectionality, that kind of reaching out to all oppressed and marginalized peoples and kind of being there in support of everybody, in solidarity with everybody. So in our last, I guess, few minutes, what's other, like in regards to both the incident at the school board and in regards to the seizure of your phone and kind of other clear overreaches by AISD PD as well as possibly the district, what kind of interventions has Education Austin been attempting to kind of make here?
So I first of all want to thank you, Brianna, for really lifting up the union's role here. A lot of people think that unions simply pay, benefits, workplace conditions, and protect people when they're in trouble, right? Pay, benefits, and treatment in the workplace are social justice issues. There are people that were working in mines for 7 days a week, children that were 10, 8, 9, 10 years old that were working in factories and abused. And so these are social justice issues. But as time has moved along, we've had to expand what social justice and the issues we stand for. Our members and the people they work with are in the LGBTQ community. We have Black and brown members. I mean, whereas the labor movement 100 years ago, it was it was segregated. And so we have issues we have to deal with today, but we also recognize that the community is now the new density. So whereas there used to be a 30 to 40% density in private sector unions back in the 50s, we're now down to 5% on 6% on a good day. Public sector like ourselves are the largest unions, and they're coming after us. So you mentioned the attacks on unions. So I think it's important for people to understand that unions are not just what they saw in the movies and what they grew up thinking they were. They really are involved in communities. And we see teacher strikes, teacher walkouts, teacher walk-ins all across the country, the Red State Rebellion that has reignited the union movement and the labor movement in this country. What we're doing here locally and what I've asked our partners in social justice around the city, Nelson Linder from the NAACP, Chaz Moore of Austin Justice Coalition, reaching out to grassroots leadership, the Urban League. Just all kinds of groups that will work with us. And they came together about a week ago in a press conference, calling the district out on this, but also announcing that the district has agreed. Dr. Cruz, in a phone call to him, agreed that he would meet in a roundtable, or that his administration would meet with us, and that the AISD Police Department would meet with us as well as other groups around the city in a series of roundtable discussions to discuss the role of police in our schools, policies that we may need to see happen to prevent this from happening, what happened to me, to happen again, to make sure that around SB 944 that there's clear policy and a procedure to approach this and that everybody understands it, and that we really decide what the broader role of law enforcement is in our schools. So we're excited about this. We're glad the district agreed to it. I'm in the process of reaching out to those organizations again and setting up meetings for us.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to go ahead and wrap it up. We have been joined by Ken Zarifis, who's the president of Education Austin, talking about several different incidents regarding AISD, the school district, and its police department. Thank you very much, Ken, for coming on the show.
It's a real pleasure, Brianna. Thank you so much for asking me on.
That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates in Austin, Texas, and is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. We are out of here.